There is a moment in the history of the Western world that is iconic. It is moving. It's a pivot point of human history. And then this pivot point happens at what's called the Hot Gates of Thermopylae. It's the action of the 300 Spartans who stand at this choke point. It's the choke point, it's the passage that if you're coming from the east and you want to get into Greece, this is the way you have to go, especially if you're leading an army. And so these 300 Spartans stand in the choke point, the Hot Gates of Thermopylae, and they stand against the invading army of the Persian Empire, led by King Xerxes. And King Xerxes is a violent, impulsive person, and he threatens the Spartans. Right? We shall shoot so many arrows that we shall blot out the sun. And the Spartan response is, then we shall fight in the shade. And this moment, right? The Spartans stand and they eventually all die. But they buy the time for Greece to gather the armies, for Athens to gather its partners, for Sparta to call together more warriors and to defend against the invasion from the east, from the Persian Empire. This is a story that a guy named Frank Miller put together into a graphic novel called 300, and then it becomes a movie. And you should not watch or read either of these with children because they are horrifyingly violent. I have watched this movie, obviously. My wife won't, and I don't blame her. It's a little bit much even for my stomach. But the reason I tell you about this moment when the 300 Spartans face off with Xerxes, the ruler of the Persian Empire, is that we're reading the book of Esther. And as we read the opening lines of the book of Esther, we read of the king Artaxerxes. In translation, and some of the names in the Bible are just painful, and this is one of them. Artaxerxes is, in the biblical translations, this word is translated with S's, and the translation in a lot of the other ways we have of telling history, it's translated with X's. And so Xerxes and Artaxerxes, as we would translate it if it wasn't in the Bible, it's the same family. What we're reading of in the book of Esther is the same violent and impulsive line of kings that invaded and threatened, we shall blot out the sky with arrows when trying to take over Greece and invade through the Hot Gates of Thermopylae. Now, we cannot be absolutely certain which Xerxes this is. The Persian Empire is founded by Cyrus, and then Darius is the next ruler, and then there's Artaxerxes, Xerxes the second, Xerxes the first, and Xerxes the second. And we don't know which of the Xerxes this is in Esther, but like those three, Artaxerxes, Xerxes the first, and Xerxes the second, let's just say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree on these, does it? Right? And so be prepared for this king, the king of Esther, to be violent and impulsive. But I think it's important to start out by grounding Esther in like this history. This is when and where it happens. It happens, okay, let's get some geopolitics under our belts, right? It happens, okay, the kingdom of Israel was founded in 1041 BC, like that's the year, 1041, with King Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, and then in 931 BC, about a century later, the kingdom of Israel splits. Northern Israel, southern Judah. And northern Israel, the 10 tribes of northern Israel, continue along until 721 BC, at which point one of the first great empires of that area, the Syrian Empire, an empire built on cruelty and domination. Like, they scare you. Their tactic is to scare you into submission. Assyria invades and destroys Israel, destroys the northern kingdom of Israel. And those 10 tribes fade into the mists of history, and then they're gone, right? But the southern kingdom of Judah continues, which has the Davidic line and has Jerusalem and has the temple. So that continues on until the Syrian Empire is taken over by a part of it that refuses to be ground under the Assyrian boot. The Babylonians rise and they take over the Assyrian Empire. And so it is Babylon then that invades Judah. So the southern two tribes of Judah continue, in 586 is the year it happens. In 586, the 6th century BC, Babylon invades Jerusalem, invades Judah. And it's unlike Assyria, the Assyrian Empire that just grinds everything under its feet and salts the fields and takes things over. Babylon is going to use the resources. And so for Babylon, the resources of Judah are the trained, the educated, the rich, the families, right? And so they take all of them away in what we call the exile. And so all of the leadership of Israel is taken. Everyone Babylon thinks can be of use is taken. And this is like the first part of the book of Daniel tells a story of this time. And so they are taken to Babylon, and they serve in Babylon. And it is in 539, the second part of the 6th century BC, that the Babylonian Empire falls to the next great empire, the Persian Empire. And so at the beginning of the Persian Empire, a few years later, so Babylonian Empire falls in 539, and then in 536, the emperor for the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, he sends the exiled Jews back to the land of Judah. And then under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah, they rebuild the walls and they rebuild the temple. And the temple, one of the walls of the temple still stands today. This is the temple from the 6th century. The Wailing Wall in Jerusalem is that temple that is built in the 6th century BC after Cyrus sends back the Jewish, the people who have been in exile. Okay, and so this gets us now to the time of Esther, because we get to this point that we're looking at the time in the Persian Empire. And we've got to acknowledge something about how the exile had worked. When Babylon had taken Jewish people out of Judah, they couldn't get everyone, right? And then those Jewish people are in Persia. And when Cyrus sends Jewish people back to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple and the wall, to refound the Jewish kingdom, not everyone goes, right? So there are still people who are in the Persian Empire after the people return from exile. That's where Esther happens. It is happening among the Jewish people who are in the Persian Empire, and the Persian Empire was originally run by Cyrus, great wise guy, and then Darius, and then things start to go off the rails under the Xerxes, Artaxerxes, Xerxes I, Xerxes II, and Hotgate of Thermopylae, and violent and impulsive rulers start to be the norm there. So we get to the book of Esther, and we find the violent and impulsive king being impulsive. So the book starts off with the king saying to his queen, Queen Vashti, "Come and dance for all the lords who are gathered and having this feast." You got to come and you got to dance. I want to display you. I want to show you off. There's a strong hint in the text, and this is passed down in the rabbis, that by showing her off, what the king really wanted to do was to have her show up with the mark of her being queen, the crown, but that's it, and wearing nothing else. And so the queen refuses this command to dance, to titillate for the pleasure of the lords. And the king impulsively says, "That's it. You're no longer queen. You're out." And he sends letters all across to all the local governments of the empire saying, "Women can't say no. How dare women have an opinion for themselves? They cannot have agency. They can't speak up for themselves," right? So he's threatened by this. And after the letter was sent, and proper order has been restored with men in charge of all things. Please understand how tongue-in-cheek I'm saying that, right? After order has been restored, the king has this moment of, "Oh, that was nice. I used to have a queen. It was nice." And before he can decide anything, we read that his servants, seeing him maybe being slightly self-reflective and having a coherent thought, immediately respond by running to get as many women to put in front of him as possible. "Here, quick, pick another woman, satisfy your impulses." He doesn't come off well in this story. He really doesn't, right? So one of the women who is presented to the king for consideration is a woman named Esther. Esther is a Jewish lady. Has been raised by Mordecai, a Jewish fellow who is in governmental service. And Mordecai is a helpful fellow. Mordecai had heard of a plot against the king and had reported the plot and had saved the king's life, right? So he is a helpful fellow. And so Esther is one of the women who is considered, and following the advice of those around her, she does what she's told. Like, if you think about it, King Vashti was dethroned because she didn't do what she was told, and Esther, she's just going to do what she's told. Mordecai tells her, don't tell anyone you're a Jew, and she doesn't. And the people are sort of helping her prepare to go before the king. They tell her what to do, she does it, and she does what she's told, and the king picks her. She is now Queen Esther. And so at this point, the story keeps on moving, and there's a new prime minister. You may have noticed that leaders attract people of the same type. And so a violent, impulsive king attracts a violent and impulsive prime minister, Haman. Haman is the guy's name. He is second in charge of the king. He oversees the daily affairs of the kingdom. And whenever you tell the story of Esther in Jewish synagogues to this day, whenever the name of Haman is said, people grab noisemakers and spin them to blot out the name of Haman. Like, there's this sort of air of, the whole story is just very tongue-in-cheek and over the top, even as we tell it today, right? And so Haman is very full of himself, and he insists that everyone must bow before him. But Mordecai will not. Mordecai will not, and Haman, being as impulsive as his king, goes to his king and says, there are people who do not follow the law. We should kill them all. And the king, without thinking to ask anything further, says, yeah, go ahead, kill them. And so Haman now has the authorization to go kill not just Mordecai, one Jew, but he's going to kill all the Jews. And he casts lots, he draws straws to figure out when he should do this. And a lot is called a pur in Hebrew. And the plural of that is purim. It's the same way that multiple angels are cherub or cherubim. It's the im ending makes it plural. And so Purim is the holiday celebrating what happens in Esther. But Haman, he draws these lots, the Purim, and he picks the day. This is the day in which I will kill all the Jews. And he tells the king, and I will pay for this. I will pay you 10,000 talents. Mwahahaha. 10,000 talents is crazy money. That's like a bajillion dollars. That's like made up math. You can work in the economy of the day, you could work your entire life and not make one talent. A talent was what you measured the income of nations. GDPs are measured in talents. And so for him to say, I'll pay 10,000 talents, like either Haman is just like Bill Gates rich, or he's going to like take all the stuff from the Jews that he's going to have killed and then like pay the king back, or I don't know. But it's just like, it's completely over the top. But that's what he has arranged. He has drawn the date. He's determined the date. He sends out letters. All the local government, because he's the prime minister, he's going to use the government. He's going to use his soldiers to do this. And on this day, let's go kill all the Jews. And that's the plan. And so the Jews, this gets out. Like, because you're going to do a big, massive program of the government, and Mordecai is part of the local government. And so Mordecai finds out about this. And he goes to his family member, Esther, and he says, you got to do something about this. And Esther is kind of squeamish. Like, she has gotten along by just doing what she's told and not rocking the boat, not causing problems. And but Esther agrees. I'll do this. I will do this. And Mordecai says to her, for such a time as this is this is the phrase that comes out of the book of Esther. Why are you where you are? Maybe it is for such a time as this. And Esther is understandably worried, because if she goes to the king and he doesn't extend his scepter to greet her, if she goes to the king without being called, and he doesn't extend his scepter to greet her, she's put to death, because that's how king, impulsive and violent, that's how this guy rolls. So she's worried. but she agrees that she'll do this. She asks, have all the Jewish people of the nation pray for me, and I'll prepare this. So she goes and she invites the king and the prime minister, Haman, to lunch, to drink some wine and have lunch. And so as she goes to him, the king extends his scepter, and she is allowed to live, and she makes her invitation. And Haman, who has to go get ready for lunch now, he's so excited because he has an invitation from the queen, who he doesn't know is Jewish. But he sees Mordecai on his way home. And upon seeing Mordecai, he's grumbling again. So he goes home and he says, what can I do to get ready to kill Mordecai? I'm going to build a gallows just for him. So when that day comes, I'm going to kill him myself. So that's what he does. And so Esther has them over. They drink wine. And Esther asks of Haman and the king, come back tomorrow for a feast. Esther's got cold feet. She's worried. Like she's never rocked the boat before. She's got cold feet. So she calls, says, come back tomorrow. I'll have a feast for you. That's what I'll do. I'll have a feast for you. Like gives her a reason to call them back. And so the king, he goes to bed that night. Haman's building his gallows. The king can't sleep. The king starts reading. He doesn't read because he can't fall asleep. He has someone else read to him. So they're going through the history of the records, what has happened in the past. It's like Facebook memories, except someone's actually reading it to you. And he is told the story of, remember that time when Mordecai saved your life? And he says, what did we do for him? And the answer is, nothing. We didn't do anything for him. And so the king says, we should. And so the next morning he gets up, and as they're getting ready to go to the feast, he asks Haman, what should I do to the person I want to honor? Because he wants to honor Mordecai, who had saved his life. And Haman says, well, you should go do this and this and this, and put him on your horse and parade him around. And the king looks at Haman and says, well, you need to go do that to Mordecai right now, because he saved my life. And so Haman is horrified by this, but he has to do what he's told by the king, because as we've covered, the king is violent and impulsive. And so he goes and he honors Mordecai, I'm sure grumbling the whole time, but at least he's going to get to go to the feast. And so he goes to the feast where Esther is there. And Esther is talking to the king, and the king says, okay, what can I do for you? What is your request? Up to half of my kingdom I will give you. And Esther says, can you please give me my life and the lives of my people? For this man here, Haman, he has decided to kill us all. For I am Jewish. And what you signed off on killing all those people who are not obeying the law, they are obeying the law. And they're Jewish too. You've signed off on killing all of the Jews in your kingdom. And the king, who had not read the fine print, realizes what's going on. And Haman gets down to try to beg for his life at Esther's feet, but it comes off as he's about to attack her. And the king looks at Haman and says, you'll even attack my wife? And he has Haman hung on the gallows that Haman had made to kill Mordecai on. And then this is the moment at which Mordecai ascends and he takes Haman's place, and this is the moment at which the book, we tend to stop telling the story here. Here's where all the VBS story versions stop. Because what happens next is Mordecai says to the king, let's stop this from happening, but the king says, you can't recant. If I've said it's going to happen on this date, I've said you can kill Jews. I can't admit I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. I'm the king. Right? It's somewhat on the lines of if the president does it, it makes it legal type of argument. And so, a little Nixon there if you want. But, and so Mordecai has to come up with another option. He says, we'll do this. And he sends out a letter to everyone across the nation that says, anyone who's preparing to kill the Jews, on this date, before the date that we've all said you can go kill Jews, on this date before that, Jews can kill them first. And so that's what happens, right? That's what happens. Hundreds and hundreds of people in each city are killed on the date that's set beforehand. You can still kill Jews on that date down the road, but beforehand, we're going to set a date a week or two beforehand that you can kill them first. And on the date this happens, the king goes to Esther and says, hey, how's this working out? And Esther says, you know what? Here in the capital city, you have a big capital, King Xerxes. We didn't get to everyone today. Could we have a second day to keep on killing some more people? And the king goes, yeah, go for it. Have another day to kill people. So that's what they do. They have a second day to kill more people that had planned, because there was the people who had like made the plans and were like publicly getting ready to kill the Jews. And so then in the big city, they have 2 days to do it. And the total body count ends up being 7,000 people, we read. So remember, King Xerxes, impulsive and violent. Yeah. And Mordecai then decrees that this is a holiday. From here on out, we're going to celebrate the holiday. This is the holiday, the book of Esther declares, here's your new holiday. You're going to celebrate this. And the book ends, all of the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was powerful among the Jews and popular with his many kindred, for he sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all of his descendants. And so the book of Esther ends with this sense of like, put a Jew in charge. He's good for business. He's good for the kingdom. He's good for the nation. He'll take care of things, right? And that's it. That's the end of the book. In Purim, the celebration of this moment, when Jews slaughtered preemptively, March 23rd, or 23rd and 24th, if you're in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is a capital city, and in the capital cities, much like in the capital city, if you remember, Esther says, can I have a second day because the capital city is so big? They still honor that. The Jewish tradition is you get 2 days if you're in a capital city. So Purim is still celebrated, March 23rd of 2024. And the way it's celebrated is fascinating, because what it takes for Esther to get the king and Haman together is to give them wine and get them together and have a feast and wine. And so part of the celebration of Purim is to drink wine. And here's the tradition. This has been passed down for centuries. You have to drink wine until you can't tell the difference between Barak Mordecai, blessed be Mordecai, or Arar Haman, cursed be Haman. And so if you think about how much you'd have to drink for that to be the case, the modern interpretation is that you drink a little bit more than you usually do, and then you just fall asleep slightly tipsy, and you can't tell the difference when you're asleep. So it's a weird festival, right? And another part of Purim is masquerading and dressing up. And it's dressing up as other people or cross-dressing as another gender. Like, it's a weird, like, you show up in the thing that will surprise other people the most. Because Esther, like, surprise, I'm a Jew. The king, like, he is surprising because here's a king, can't make a decision. Every time the king needs to make a decision in the Bible, in the book of Esther, someone else has to tell him what to do. And surprised, here is God in the story. But the name of God actually doesn't show up in the book of Esther. And so the surprising and the unexpected and drinking, that's kind of, and then you give kids candy, because if kids dress up, you give them candy. There are certain things that are just given. And so that is the book of Esther. It's the last book chronologically in the Old Testament. It's this weird moment because it's doing something interesting. As the Jewish people, this is the last moment. Not like it's not the last book in the Old Testament, but it's the last. It records the last bit of history in the Old Testament. It's the latest year, so to speak. And so there's this way in which the book of Esther guides the Jewish people forward into a future into which they know they're going to struggle, much as which they did in the book of Esther, struggle for their survival. And the story is exactly what it looks like. There's no trickery going on here. There's no huge master analogies or metaphors or imagery to pull out. It's just a story of Esther, who got along to get along, didn't rock the boat until she had to, and isn't a good thing that she did. All right. There are some women in Scripture who she joins, people who step forward and do what they have to. Jael back in Judges 4, Mary will, as we read in the beginning of the book of Matthew and Luke in the New Testament, but she joins into this group of women who they step up and they do what they have to for the moment in which they were born, for such a time as this. And it takes her 2 swings to do so. Like, she invites the guys to lunch. She can't do it that day. She has to invite them back a second time. She has to kind of steel up her nerves and get going. But I find that inspiring because it's real. And I guess that's where I land with the book of Esther. Is like it's all a fascinating story, and it lands on this simple realization. Esther was able to do what she had to do when the moment of truth came. I pray we can do the same in our lives for such a time as whatever time we're born into. Amen.